On this episode of Newt's World, American K-12 education appears to be developing a teacher morale crash. Recent surveys have revealed that the appeal of the teaching profession and job satisfaction of teachers has been declining for years. Stagnant wages, the higher cost of post-secondary education, and the lack of job security are some of the factors that have likely contributed to the decline of teacher satisfaction. According to the most recent teacher survey by EdChoice Morning Consult, only 39% of teachers feel K-12 education is on the right track in their local school district. In addition, only 15% of teachers said they would recommend the teaching profession to friends and family members. So what are some of the issues teachers are facing right now, and why are they feeling so burned out? Here to discuss the results of their recent survey, I am really pleased to welcome my guest, Robert Enlow, President and CEO of EdChoice. Robert, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for having me.
Can you briefly talk about EdChoice and your mission?
Sure. EdChoice is the legacy foundation of Milton and Rose Friedman. We started out as the Milton and Rose Friedman Foundation. Many of your listeners, I assume, will know who Milton Friedman, the economist, is. Our job is very simple. We fight to advocate for policies where every child can get every dollar to go to every learning opportunity in America. We want full and universal school choice, and we've been the leading organization doing that since 1996.
I should say, just for anybody who does not know, Milton Friedman was maybe the most influential economist in the United States in the last two generations, and did a series with his wife called Free to Choose, which was on television, which had a remarkable impact. People like Ronald Reagan really resonated with the concept of freedom, which was at the heart of what Milton was all about. So school choice was one example of his overall commitment to maximizing freedom and to giving people the greatest range of choices. So talk about different kinds of school choice and the kind of school choice that EdChoice supports.
Sure. You know, when we started in 1996, just by way of growth, there were 6 school choice programs operating in 6 states. Now there are 83 school choice programs operating in 33 states in the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, serving now over 1 million students. So this is amazing growth in the last 25 years. And the last 4 years, you've seen the most amazing growth. And what we mean by school choice, there are different mechanisms for school choice. There are school vouchers. There's tax credit programs. There's now education savings account programs. Let me make sure your listeners know the difference. A school voucher program is very simple. The money set aside for your child goes to the private school of choice. A charter school is very much the same. A parent chooses a charter school and the money goes there. A tax credit program is you divert your tax resources to education and the government gives it back to you. And then the new program is called education savings accounts. This is what's happened since the pandemic. It's not just about getting money to go to a private school. It's about getting monies to families who can customize their education. They're called education savings accounts. So if I want to go part-time to a private school because they have a great math program, but I need a tutor for science, I can do that. If I want to go to part-time to a charter school because they have a great STEM program, I can do that and supplement it with other tutors or other curriculums. So education savings are basically a way to get money in the hands of parents who can customize their child's education. And then since 2019, 11 states have passed universal educational savings account programs.
Which is really just an extraordinary change from 30 years ago.
Oh, dramatic change. And, now we're looking at the fact that 36% of all Americans are now eligible to receive a scholarship to go to the school or learning opportunity of their choice. Just imagine that 20 years ago, you couldn't say that at all. And charter schools were barely off the ground. So we really have created a set of learning opportunities that Milton Friedman would be happy about.
One of the major arguments against school choice on the side of the teachers union and the traditional bureaucracy is that it would take money away from public education. What actually does happen?
So what happens in school choice programs is the exact same thing that happens when you pick up and move a house from one public school district to another public school district. The money follows you. In this case, instead of to the school district of your choice, to the school or learning opportunity of your choice. So think about this. Whenever my friends in the traditional schools or public schools say you're draining money, I said, well, if I'm draining money, then anyone who moves public schools is draining money, right? Because the money follows kids. And that's what we're looking for, funding kids and not systems. So that's what happens in public schools. And that's what we want to happen to all schooling opportunities. And since in the private school choice world, the money is never equal to what the total amount is spent on a child, it cannot cost the state money, right? So if I'm at a public school and it costs in my home state $15,000 for a third grader to go to elementary school here, and in a charter school, they get $8,000. And on the school voucher program, they get $6,000. Somehow that child is worth $9,000 less going to a private school. Same child, though. So there's just no way it can take money away. But we understand that those folks who oppose school choice really think all the dollars should just stay in government-run schools.
I noticed that you've done two different surveys, one with teenagers and one with K-12 educators on their views in education. Why did you pick those two groups?
Just so happened, Speaker Gingrich, at the beginning of the pandemic in February 2020, we decided to launch a polling project every month with Morning Consult. So we've been polling adults and then at various stages, teenagers and teachers every month since 2020. So we have long-term data on what the public thinks. And then we've done 4 teacher polls and 3 teen polls. And what we're finding on the teen one is the one that bothers me the most. Teens are really not in a good place in schooling, right? Our polling found that teens don't feel safe at school. Their classes are regularly disrupted. They feel that social media is having a terrible impact on their lives. Absenteeism is a huge issue. And here, we all know this, they're bored to death, but 30% of all teens think school is a waste of time, right? A quarter of all teens say that they have no plans after school. This is a problem. And teens are saying it themselves. They're saying it to us that they don't feel that schooling is what they want. And then you add to that the teacher morale crash, which is worse than it was last year when we did this poll. You use some of the numbers, but 19% of the teachers now say it's going in the right direction nationally. That was 35% a year ago, which is still low. So now you've seen a major crash in the fact that teachers just don't think it's going the right way. And that's because they're seeing the fact that kids are absent. They're seeing all of the modifications with the regulations. They're seeing all of the complications that come in from top-down bureaucracy. And they're doing a bunch of catch-up work on COVID, and they're not able to catch up. So it's a huge problem. Teachers are really frustrated, and there are tons of challenges. Positive side, though, Mr. Speaker, 70% of teachers that we polled support education savings accounts. They want something different. They want to get out of the classroom and try something new.
One of the competitions that's made life so much different is social media and cell phones. And yet, in your poll, 32% of teens believe children should be at least 13, and another 35% believe they should be at least 14 years old. So that means that 67%, 2 out of every 3 teenagers, believe there should be limits to younger people having access. On March 25th, Governor Ron DeSantis signed Florida's HB 3. The law requires that social media platforms prohibit users under 14 years old from creating accounts and requires these platforms to obtain parental consent for account registrants who are 14 or 15 years old. Is it your sense that we need some kind of serious effort to restrict very young people from having these kind of social media capabilities?
We absolutely need to be very cognizant of the impact of social media on kids younger than 13 and 14. And look, if teenagers at that level are saying, hey, it's bad for kids younger than this, then they're onto something. And if you dig in the data a little bit more than that, first of all, 74% say they're using social media often, very often, or extremely often. So they know it's there. And they also know one of the negative things, 40% of the teens that we polled said that the social media has a negative impact on their mental health and their self-confidence. This is not good, right? So they know it. And so we just need to be careful of it, particularly under a certain age. And I love that the teenagers kind of set your bar for you. 13 and 14, they've already told you, they've self-policed it, right?
These numbers from your poll were a big surprise to me, that the very people are telling us that they need some kind of limitations on their behavior.
Well, I think they want to limit it themselves. Whether they want it to be imposed on them, that's obviously another question, right? So they see the negativity and they understand how it shouldn't go down further than 13. They definitely see that.
It's clear that different schools are going in different directions trying to deal with cell phones. What do you see as some of the strategies that schools are using to try to get control of the cell phones?
Well, there's all sorts of different strategies, as you know. So you could, as we heard, limit the Wi-Fi in the school. You could put them in the cell phone bags. You could do a whole bunch of different things. You could say they can't bring them in. If you look at our poll, though, the teens are okay with having their cell phones in class. Part of my argument would be, if you're really going to be smart about it, I think you need to be thoughtful about how to integrate it in a way where the kids can not feel like something's being taken away from them, but also be safe and have an experience with it. So again, I was just at this one school this morning that was integrating technology and movement in a way that was really cool. They were standing up and using the AI technology to do movement and math at the same time. You've got to figure out a way to integrate it. I think if you restrict it to nothing, I think the teenagers will rebel. I think you and I can remember those days, Mr. Speaker, of rebelling when you were young. Schools are doing all sorts of different things. Safety of the kids is the most important. But I think if they're going to use cell phones, teenagers want them. They like them, even though they know the negative impact on them. So you've got to figure out a way to integrate them in a meaningful way, is what I would say.
Teenagers in your survey, 70% said all or most of their classmates are bored in school. Only 19% say that most classmates want to be in school. Nearly 3 in 14 said their classmates were bored in class. 15% of their teens said none of their classmates want to be in school. None. It doesn't that suggest that we need to profoundly rethink how these schools work?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, one of the best things I saw in the poll that we did was that I think it was 61% of all teenagers would be okay with learning outside of the classroom building 1 or more days a week. So they want a hybrid environment. They're telling you right now they want something different, right? Their plan is something different, and they definitely want to do it. And so it's very interesting how we're seeing teenagers saying, give me something different, do something different for me.
I think in your survey, 2 out of 3 teens felt that school is boring. 30% see it as a waste of time. Only 41% said they like going to school, and I'd be curious for how many of those that's because that's where their social life is and who they have lunch with. And interestingly, teachers tend to underestimate how many of their students are bored. 19% of the teachers think the students are bored versus 70%. Where does your program come down on the whole idea of homeschooling?
We welcome all types of schooling, right? And so we actually just funded something called the Homeschool Hub at Johns Hopkins University to try and better track and understand homeschooling usage and policy. It's grown so much since the pandemic. And in fact, one of the most important things we've learned since the pandemic is the largest growth in homeschooling is among Black single mothers. And that's because they're seeing it's a way to take back the power over educating their kids. They're doing it in record numbers, and they're doing it in ways that are like little villages, right? They're coming together. They're building these little hybrid communities and micro school communities and homeschooling co-ops. And it's an amazing, exciting time for homeschooling. So look, we're agnostic as to school type, but we're not agnostic as to where the funding can go and how parents can choose, right? So we just don't want the system to keep being the way it is. And we think the system has been funded in a way that is negative to kids. And ultimately, we won't change this and make this a dynamic sort of competitive educational system until we can get many, many more options on the plates of kids. And you're seeing these kids trying stuff already. I mean, you look at Providence Costa Rey. I don't know if you know this high school. It's a high school that basically only has kids in for 4 days a week. And the other day, they all go to work. They get a job and they go to work, and then they build these internships with these companies that then help them through college, and then they have a job after college. And so there's all sorts of different models that could be tried that we're not seeing tried, unfortunately, in our traditional school system.
One of the things that's very striking to me is the number of young people who say that social media leads to more bullying, that it increases their mental health concerns. I mean, it strikes me that these are really serious challenges.
Yep. And the teens said this, right? So if you look at the teen poll, they say bullying and classroom disruptions are the biggest thing they see. And in fact, they're very unhappy at their schools because their schools are not dealing with classroom disruptions very well, particularly in middle school. It's rough out there in middle school. If you looked at our poll, 65% of them are seeing classroom disruptions on a regular basis of student violent behavior. It's not good in middle school right now. And so something needs to change, which is another reason why I think universal school choice has been so successful in the last 5 years.
In your judgment, are we seeing more disruption and more bullying than used to be historically normal?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure I know all the academic answer to that. I certainly think we're seeing more disruption, Mr. Speaker. I think there's definitely more disruptions because you're not seeing classrooms organized in the way they used to be. As to bullying, I think there's more bullying based on the data I've seen. I haven't seen it. We went to school at a different time when bullying probably wasn't as well noticed and documented as it is now, which is a good thing that it's noticed. But I would say ultimately what I think is happening here is disruption is significant and serious and worse than it used to be, classroom disruptions. We just had an experience in Indianapolis where a young special needs kid in first grade was beaten up by another young kid, and the teacher stood by and said, "Get him." This stuff is happening, and it's happening in an ongoing way, and it's not a very good thing.
And why is it not policed and repressed?
Well, I think it is, but as you know, the teachers' unions have a lockstep on how the organization of schooling works. I mean, this is markets 101. When you create monopolies, their entire job is to ensure that the system maintains its status quo as opposed to work on what really customers and students need. And so I think one of the things the pandemic has done is really shifted how schools are going to have to respond. And I think public schools are having a hard time catching up. Think about it this way. Prior to the pandemic, most families had the same cultural experience of education. We went to school. We had a teacher in front of our classroom. It's what we learned. The pandemic, all of a sudden, everyone became a teacher. Everyone looked over the back of their kids over the school Zoom, and they saw what was going on, and there was a different common cultural experience. And that has been leading to this massive change in school choice. And that's one of the reasons why we've seen it growing so much. And so that, along with the constant disruption in schools, the constant mental health issues, because I don't think schools are able to handle it. Again, I was at this school Turning Point here in Indianapolis, serving mostly low-income kids on the voucher program, and they had no disruption. They're the same kids that would go to a traditional school system, but there was no disruption. And it's the families want a faith-based environment, a small environment, an environment where they can feel they have control. And that's what they get when they had school choice.
Part of this process, it seems to me, is sorting out how to improve the existing schools, figuring out how to create competitive schools, and in some cases, shaping the education around the individual rather than having the individual have to be shaped around the education. Given the years you've put into this, are you optimistic that we're migrating in the right direction?
Yes, I'm very optimistic that the policy is migrating in the right direction. I'm not so sure about the implementation yet. We've definitely gotten to the tip of the iceberg, and now it's all the work that we need to do to build the rest of it out. I've been saying this a lot recently. If in the next 20 years, if we look back on all the policy change that's happened in the last 10 years, and schooling is being delivered in the same way, with kids sitting in front of a teacher, in front of some kind of a board, then we have failed. Right? We're trying here to disrupt the way delivery of education happens. And we have to do that in a meaningful way. And if you look at every other industry that you've been part of and I've been part of over the years, could you imagine if we delivered cell phones the way they came out at the beginning? Everyone needs to have access to a common cell phone, and it's that giant cell phone at the beginning, right, where you'd have to carry it around your shoulder. Or the old boom boxes that were huge. I mean, technology advances things. And so I think if we haven't used technology and we haven't used the competitive juices to change how we deliver education, I think we're in real trouble. And part of the challenge to the school choice movement is to not get satisfied with everyone is now free to choose. So like in a state like Arkansas, everyone can choose. That's great. now they need to be choosing every option, and they need to have all the money set aside for them. So you look like a state like Utah, fantastic program they have there. Everyone's eligible, and they can choose all these cool options, but they only allocated $80 million for it. That's not nearly enough, right? And so you have to think about how a competitive marketplace works. And so I'm excited, but the biggest work is in front of us to make sure that we don't mess up the implementation.
There's a cultural part of this. That is, you can talk about school choice and you can talk about homeschooling, but athletics in some ways is the glue that holds together the schools. We've become a country, and we see this also in our television viewing, where sports, if you're going to play on the football team or the soccer team or what have you, you're going to be at the school. That's still a huge factor in keeping people, whether they're learning anything or not, they're socially engaged.
I joke that when I get done with taking on the teachers unions, I'm going to take on a harder job, which is the high school athletic associations around the country. And the reality of it is, yes, high school athletics has been important for a long time. That's changing. Right? People are unbundling their education. If you look at their athletics, a lot of families are doing travel baseball, they're doing travel soccer, they're doing club level programs. There's a lot of change that's happening right now, and I think that's a good thing. The more you get to that kind of club level sports, the more you get to community-based sports as opposed to school-based sports. One of the great things is now homeschoolers can create their own teams or join to other teams. And so there's bills out there to try and unbundle the athletics. And I think that's the right step in the right direction.
In a way, it's all become an industrial system now. You start playing junior high football so you can play high school football, so you can play college football, so you can be one of the handful of people who make the NFL or the NBA or whatever, as opposed to, I really like to go out and participate because it's physically good.
Correct. If you look at the serious club sports, I mean, you start AAU basketball when you're in elementary school, if you're good. And so there is a different level that's starting to happen. Ultimately, I think what's beginning to happen, though, when you talk about cultural shifts, we know from the data that the more parents choose, the more they start to choose wisely, and the more they choose for the right reasons, and the more comfortable they get. The power of choice is a really big deal. So once you help them have that choice, and then they start exercising that choice, they go from saying things like, I want a good school, to what test are you taking? When are you taking? What's your curriculum? And how are you doing it, right? And so as you become a more savvy customer, a more savvy consumer, as you have more choices, you recognize your money follows you, right? You begin to have more power. And I think the same thing would happen with athletics down the road. But unbundling is the future, Mr. Speaker.
Are you seeing the rise of information systems that help people sort out which school might be best or which approach might be best for their child?
Very early. We're beginning to see this. I love that you bring this up. So as you know, a market has three things that are required. It requires demand. It requires customers that have power to pay. It requires an unbundled supply, an unbridled supply, and it requires good information. We're just getting to beginning the work on the unbundled supply and the unbundled information. We're just getting there. There are some places out there like Match Ed or great schools, but we're just in the nascent stages of that. There's some navigator programs for parents that are beginning. Families Empowered is a great one. Love Your School, which we've been very supportive of. There are some growing ones, but it's a long way off from being the kind of mature information that we need. The one thing we got to be careful of is we don't want to centralize it. Right. I think the charter sector centralized all this, and I think it's become a problem when they do that.
The only way you centralize it is to have government do it. And if government does it, it won't work.
Correct.
And because what you need is a consumer-oriented, constantly evolving system. And that's almost antithetical to the way bureaucracies function.
That's correct, which is why I'm excited about education savings accounts in general, because they can unbundle sort of learning from a building. It does create the opportunities for these kind of proper feedback loops.
When you look around the country, what states do you think are the most advanced in developing this future education system?
Florida, Arizona, New Hampshire, Indiana, Arkansas, and then a bunch of other ones are starting to grow. So Iowa is beginning its process, but it's still just private schools. But I think if you look at Florida, Arizona, Indiana, and Arkansas, and a few others, you're going to see real growth down the road. Indiana now, it's a voucher program, but we have an ESA program as well. over 75,000 kids are on the program already, which is 6.8% of the student population. Florida now has 10% of the kids or more on the choice program. You're really seeing market penetration in states like Arizona, Florida, Indiana, and soon to be Arkansas down the road. So it's exciting. When you look at Florida and you see the charts of 20 years ago, the percentage of kids that were compelled to go to public schools versus the percentage of kids now compelled to go and all the options they have, it's gone from 90% to 54%. And so you're seeing massive change in the marketplace, and that's great.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that Jeb Bush was one of the great unsung heroes of this whole movement, and he carried Florida further, faster than any other state in the country.
I think Governor Bush, just like Governor Daniels, sort of took those major steps forward. And then I think we learned from them. I think the challenge we have going forward in this movement is not letting this sort of idea of government bureaucratic accountability get in the way of unbundled choice. Right. So this is a real challenge because we have people who want to say, oh, we have to know how every single dollar is spent. We have to know how everything is done. And while that is true, in the education savings account program, for example, in Arizona, I can tell you where every single dollar goes at every single minute of every single day. You may not like where it goes, but I can tell you where it goes. You cannot say that of any of our traditional school systems. We've got to be very careful to impose an accountability system of the public school sector onto a competitive sector. And that would be a real problem if we do that.
So if you are a parent and you're really concerned about your child and you're really not convinced that they're in the right place, where are the kind of resources you could go to learn what your choices are at a practical, real level?
That's a great question. So many states that have school choice have state-based groups that offer a bunch of information. But frankly, come to EdChoice.org. We have something called School Choice in Your State. It goes over every single program in America. And if you send us an email, we'll connect you with the people on the ground that can help you with that information. So EdChoice.org, School Choice in Your State, we have that information ready to go.
You really are at the cutting edge. And what you're doing with EdChoice, seems to me, is central to the survival of the country. I mean, if we don't fix education, we're not going to be able to compete with anybody, and we're not going to have citizens capable of being a really functional citizen in a free society. I mean, Jefferson warned that there's never been a people who were ignorant and free, and that it's impossible.
Yeah, Rose Friedman said it best for me. She said, if you have a nation that can't read, can't write, can't compute, doesn't understand history, who's going to govern the affairs of our country?
We really have both a national security interest and economic interest and a fundamental patriotic interest in getting our systems to work. And the work you're doing, Robert, is a significant part of that. I want to thank you for joining me. Your EdChoice Morning Consult survey results can be found on your website at edchoice.org. And I encourage policymakers, school board members, parents, and students to check it out. I think they'll find it fascinating, and it will open up their minds to other possibilities. But thank you very much for being our guest.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you to my guest, Robert Enlow. You can review the results of the EdChoice Morning Consult Teacher Survey on our show page at newsworld.com. Newsworld is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Pendley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newsworld, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newsworld can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newsworld.